Two ETF insiders from a $12 billion firm have just gone on an absolute rampage this week, dropping some serious warnings, not only on the national news like Matt Hogan just did, but also kind of warning that there is a significant supply shock brewing in the Bitcoin space. Let's listen from one of Bitwiser's head men in charge, and let's kind of extrapolate and run the maths today to figure out just how much time we might have left as this supply suffocation continues to brew.
The liquid supply. So currently we are seeing the on-exchange balances of Bitcoin being the lowest, I think, going back to 2018. So this is like going back for many, many years now. The balances for Bitcoin on exchange have never been this low. And what that signals is that there's a lack of sellers on the market. So people will move from cold storage to exchange when they're ready to sell their Bitcoin. And if the exchanges are showing low balances, that means that we have few sellers in the market, and that will be come into play and become very interesting once there is a rise and the buyers come back into the market for Bitcoin. My prediction, and of course I don't have a crystal ball and I don't know, and this isn't investment advice, but my feeling is that
we're going to get to his prediction in a moment, but I really do want to crunch some numbers today and have a look at just how drastic this supply suffocation is before we play that next clip from Matt Hogan, because this chart right here is actually showing us the outflows from exchanges that we saw as Bitcoin dipped under $80,000. It was the biggest outflow. Have a look at that big red bar. That's the biggest one we've seen since the FTX collapse in 2022, when Bitcoin dipped below $20,000. We saw a massive amount of outflows. We saw 36,000 Bitcoin leave the exchanges on November 9th, 2022. And we saw something pretty comparable here recently. We saw an enormous outflow of Bitcoin leaving the exchanges as Bitcoin dipped below $80,000. So the big question is $80,000 the new $16,000? Is this a local bottom for Bitcoin? Are the ETFs going to buy more and more Bitcoin? Well, this is where we get into our second clip from Matt Hogan that I have prepared for you guys, because he makes some pretty shocking predictions in the most recent interview he did with Natalie Brunell. So let's listen to this one.
And beyond. Before the Bitcoin ETFs launched, the most successful ETF of all time gathered $5 billion in its first year. That was the ceiling. ETFs did 37, right? 37 is so much more. I was optimistic they might do 10.
Yeah.
I thought it was going to be huge. We had worked on it for 6 years. So of course we thought it would be huge, but $37 billion is crazy. All that said, I bet we do 50 this year. I think people, if they think it's like the
$50 billion, that's a lot of inflows. Okay, think about this for a minute. If BlackRock and the other ETFs are squatting on more than 1 million coins, we've seen $37 billion of buy pressure from these ETFs in year one. This ETF insider thinks we're going to see $50 billion of inflows in year two. Does this mean the ETFs are going to accumulate another 500,000 coins, 600,000-700,000 coins? Again, remember, the price of Bitcoin is a lot higher today than it was when the ETFs first launched in early 2024, meaning that if we do see $50 billion of inflows, we're not going to see BlackRock accumulate as many Bitcoin as they have, because when we take a look at it, we've got some pretty mind-boggling statistics here. We can see BlackRock already is squatting on 527,000 Bitcoin. They are absolutely pulling away from the pack. I love to show you this little visualization as much as possible, because it kind of shows at the beginning, BlackRock, Fidelity, there was kind of a 1 and 2 race going on. BlackRock wasn't necessarily the only big beneficiary from that ETF launch, but have a look at how that gap has just widened since 2024. It's growing. BlackRock's influence in Bitcoin, it's growing. We can see right now, the ETFs hold over 1 million coins, around 1.1 million coins. So if Matt Hogan is right, and we do see significantly more inflows into these Bitcoin ETFs, what's going to happen? Okay, this here's, again, it's one of my favorite charts, but I've got a couple of other favorite charts up my sleeve that I want to show you guys, really kind of highlighting what we've talked about so far. We know that the Bitcoin on exchanges right now, this is my favorite chart. I nearly share this every live stream. We can see 900,000 Bitcoin have left the exchange since late 2022. This trend is absolutely accelerating. And this is what ETF insiders like Matt Hogan are simply recognizing. Let's listen to the rest of this little clip.
This bell curve and down we go. It's not. Every ETF almost in history that's been a success does more in year 2 than year 1, and more in year 3 than year 2, and more in year 4 than year 3. For the reasons we started talking about at the beginning, half of the market can't even buy this thing yet. And the other half is just learning. And the people who bought it in the first year are probably going to double down. Think about the first time you bought Bitcoin. Do you own more today than you owned then? Of course you own more. That's just the direction of travel. So I was blown away, but I think this year will be even bigger.
That's something that I think a lot of people miss when it does come to these ETF flows. A lot of people firstly thought that the first month, the first 2 months, it was an anomaly. Yes, the Bitcoin ETFs broke all records, but that was just a flash in the pan. That was just a little bit of speculation. That didn't mean anything because, well, I mean, Bitcoin was just a speculative bubble, right? But when we kind of zoom out, we can see that the flows have just continued to increase month after month, wave after wave, even despite this massive correction in macro recently. Have a look at how strong the Bitcoin ETF flows have actually held up. Now, I've got a little bit of a treat for you guys. I want to show you a couple of different charts that I think is really interesting. So we're obviously going to be looking at the biggest, the most liquid stock market in the world. Let's have a look at the S&P 500. Let's see what it has done recently and compare what happened in 2020 to what happened recently. So everybody remembers 2020, the S&P 500 crashed by about 35% in 3 weeks. It was aggressive, 36% correction. We can also see, let's have a look at what it did recently, because I think these numbers are going to be pretty interesting to look at. The S&P 500 crashed 21% in a matter of 2 to 3 weeks. So again, it was just as aggressive, the crash we just saw in the S&P 500. Now, who remembers what happened to Bitcoin in early 2020 when the global markets melted down? Who remembers Bitcoin crashed, from memory, something like 55% overnight, in a night? No, I didn't stutter. Let's give you the exact figure here. So we can see Bitcoin crashed, wow, 63%. Okay, so this is the chart of Bitcoin I have up on screen right now. Now let me clean it up a little bit. I've got a little bit of trash and some lines and some boxes all over this puppy. Let's clean it up. So we can see, let's compare apples to apples. In that 2020 crash, Bitcoin crashed 63%. What about recently? Let's have a look. Let's have a look at what Bitcoin has done recently. Again, stocks had a comparable drawdown. Bitcoin peak to trough, down 32%. But if we have a look at the more recent price action, Bitcoin hardly budged. It's at $84,000. The carnage in the stock market happened about here. So at its absolute worst, Bitcoin was down 13%. At its absolute worst. Again, we're only looking at the past 4 weeks of this chart here to really make it an apples to apples comparison. Because look what stocks have done in the past 4 weeks. Down 21%. Bitcoin was only down 13%. Boy, have times changed. Boy, have times changed. Is Bitcoin now the risk-off asset? Is Bitcoin now less volatile than stocks? Over the past month, it is. Absolutely, it is. And maybe this has to do with what Matt Hogan and the other ETF insiders at the $12 billion firm Bitwise are looking at. Let's listen to their prediction.
To move back up again, it's going to jump. Big thing is that when it does start to move back up again, it's going to jump because there simply aren't any sellers. And if people are bidding and trying to buy and there aren't sellers in the market, they're going to just keep, offering higher and higher prices to buy the Bitcoin that they want. And so I expect that it'll gap up quite significantly when it does start to rise again in the future.
So what does Bitwise know that we don't? They think the price of Bitcoin is going to gap up because of the supply suffocation, because of the charts that I've been showing you today. Not necessarily the price chart of Bitcoin, but more the price charts that we're looking at right here. Bitwise is incredibly bullish on Bitcoin. And I do think it's interesting that they came out and dropped 3 absolute banging clips this week while a lot of people think that the Bitcoin bull run is over. Okay, Matt Hogan even went on national news and said, look, I think the answer to who wins in this currency war that Donald Trump has kind of created is Bitcoin. Bitcoin's set up to rally significantly. All 3 of these clips I've played you guys all come from this week. I do think it's really fascinating. A lot of people think Bitcoin is dead. Bitwise does not. Bitwise doubles down on 200,000 Bitcoin price prediction amid trade tension. This was April 10th. They came out and they said this pretty much right at the bottom. So I think we're going to be paying very, very, very close attention to what Bitwise has to say. They also included a really interesting chart here of the US dollar and Bitcoin correlation. Because as we can see, the Dixie's kind of just been chopping sideways over the past, 2 years since Bitcoin's been rallying, increasing a lot. And we can see that whenever the Dixie goes down, Bitcoin goes up. Whenever the Dixie goes up, Bitcoin goes down. Is this correlation about to break? Is this correlation going to continue? Matt Hogan thinks it's going to continue. Again, I might make a case for why it is potentially going to break a little bit sooner than people think. I'm going to save that tether rabbit hole for later. But I think the point of this first little thing I want to cover for you guys in today's live stream is that Bitwise is doubling down. Bitwise is on Team Trump. Team Trump is essentially putting the rest of the world on notice. We are going to discuss all of the nation state FOMO I'm seeing here in the not too distant future. But again, I think if a $12 billion firm like Bitwise is doubling down on its Bitcoin predictions and they're coming out right at what appears to be a local bottom, I think this is a pretty good buy signal. Again, nothing you hear on this channel is financial advice. I don't know where the price of Bitcoin is going to go in the short term or the medium term. But we did actually have a look at this chart here on a live stream last week. And this was during peak fear. I did say, look, this would be a pretty good place for the S&P 500 to bounce here, simply retesting its previous all-time high. This is actually before Trump came out and said, look, I'm willing to budge on these tariffs. We drew this funny line on the chart and, well, there you go. Have a look at it. It's bouncing. Who knows? Maybe those magic tea leaves are right from time to time. Again, I think the signal here is that Bitcoin has these corrections, these volatile corrections routinely. And the signal here is do not get shaken out. $12 billion money managers are not getting shaken out. 32% corrections are very normal in Bitcoin bull markets. Again, this just looks to be the second 30% correction we've seen. We saw a 34% correction last year between, let me move my magic drawing tool. Between March and August 2024, we saw a 34% pullback. We're just seeing another 32% pullback. And I do expect these pullbacks to get shorter, sharper, and more violent the closer the further we go in this bull run. This is what we saw in 2017. As the parabola increased, these drawdowns got shorter and sharper. This is why you need to be on your toes. If you want to be buying Bitcoin, you do really need to be thinking on your toes. Okay, this is why I encourage you guys, get set up with Bitcoin only exchanges today. Okay, I always point you towards our show partner Bitcoin Well, who's actually about to give you some free Bitcoin on this live stream right now. Again, if you sign up with the Bitcoin Well using the link in the description of today's video and use a promo code green candle, you're actually going to be given some of these tokens that you can see in the top right hand corner of this screen in that little purple box, and you're going to be able to play the Bitcoin wishing well. Okay, as soon as you start buying on the Bitcoin well, you're going to be given these tokens and you are going to be able to play the Bitcoin wishing well. And as you see, you're actually going to toss the tokens into the well and you're going to go into the draw to potentially win 1% of a Bitcoin. Whoever pulls out their Lightning wallet the quickest and scans that QR code on screen is able to claim 210 Satoshis. Again, highly recommend you check out what the Bitcoin well is doing. They're Bitcoin by default. They force you to take self-custody of your Bitcoin. I really like what they stand for. Highly encourage you to check them out. They're for everyone, whether you're a retail pleb, whether you're a high net worth institutional client looking to buy more than $50,000 of Bitcoin over the counter with really tight spreads and low fees. Highly encourage you guys to check out the Bitcoin well. Use promo code Green Candle and you can get that white glove concierge service. And once you bought your Bitcoin on the Bitcoin well, I always encourage you guys to actually protect your Bitcoin the way it should be protected. I think the easiest way to do that is with the titanium plates that you guys can get from Stampseed. Okay, these things are so much more secure than paper for your precious Bitcoin 12 or 24 words. They're going to survive absolutely everything life throws at them, whether it's fire, whether it's water, whether it's floods, whether it's hurricanes. I think the titanium plates you get from Stampseed should be your go-to solution for backing up your precious Bitcoin. Again, you guys can use a promo code Luke15 to get 15% off anything you want to buy from Stampseed. Okay, the time has come. You need to start protecting your Bitcoin while you can actually take self-custody of your Bitcoin. Again, right now, if this trend continues, we have less than 1 year left. It's as simple as that. There's a year left. If we continue to see this supply suffocation, and again, on this most recent drawdown, we saw the biggest outflow of Bitcoin from exchanges since November 2022. I'm not joking. I didn't stutter. This is huge. Look at that massive, big red. That's a red candle, that one. It's huge. It's massive. Somebody's clearly put in a massive bid under this market. And if I had to guess, it's probably some of the huge nation states around the world who appear to be getting a little bit of Bitcoin FOMO. Okay. Since Donald Trump announced that he wanted to be the Bitcoin superpower of the world, we can see nation states are tripping over themselves to get into Bitcoin. Donald Trump's Bitcoin warning, I think, has put every nation state on high alert. We can see this week a $504 billion giant in Southeast Asia is pushing to adopt a Bitcoin standard. Then earlier in the week, a country home to 240 million people appointed a billionaire to be their strategic crypto advisor. And then just when you thought the week couldn't get any more crazy, obviously most people are aware of the fact that Russia and China has just been exposed for using Bitcoin for international trade. Today, we're going to be breaking down which countries you need to be paying attention to and why I think the nation state Bitcoin race is just about to accelerate. So before we talk about Donald Trump, let's talk about the big news that happened this week. Singapore, a $500 billion giant, now has presidential and politicians in the national government pushing to establish a strategic Bitcoin reserve. Now get it, there's a ton of, Bitcoin strategic reserves all around the world. But what's interesting about Singapore is the CEO of their largest bank was bullish on Bitcoin in late 2024. He actually said, the large part of my net worth is in one stock. He's talking about Bitcoin. We actually covered this story for you guys in late 2024, but now it appears like maybe, just maybe, the CEO of the largest bank in Singapore is maybe just tapping a couple of politicians on the shoulder and saying, look, you need to be paying attention to what Donald Trump is doing in America. You need to be paying attention because we don't want to get left behind. These nation states are really suffering from a lot of FOMO. Singapore's DBS Bank to launch Bitcoin and crypto options for institutions. Again, this is massive. This is huge. This is something we covered for you guys as soon as it broke. But they are not the only nation state making a little bit of a strategic pivot into Bitcoin. I don't know if you guys saw it or not, but Pakistan's central bank is exploring mining Bitcoin with excess electricity. And here's a kicker. They did, as I mentioned in the introduction, actually appoint the CEO of Binance, billionaire CZ himself, as their very own strategic crypto advisor for the country. Again, this is pretty big news. A lot of people will say, look, you know, CZ, he's a bit of a shitcoiner. Can we trust him? Well, again, Donald Trump appointed David Sachs. At the time, I think a lot of people, myself included, were, let's just call it what it is, a little bit skeptical. I was certainly skeptical of David Sachs. Don't get me wrong. But who knows? Maybe he can do good things for the country of Pakistan. That is, of course, CZ. As you guys can see from this video, CZ is signing all the paperwork. He's dotting all the I's. He's dotting all the T's, crossing the T's, sorry. And he is now, right now, Pakistan's strategic crypto advisor. Again, Pakistan's a huge country, 240 million people of population, $300 billion GDP. Singapore, again, they are also not a tiny country. They've got a lazy $500 billion GDP. They're massive, they're huge. And they're not the only huge players, not only thinking about mining Bitcoin with excess electricity, but just openly adopting Bitcoin. Again, Pakistan, as I like to reinforce with you guys, they've adopted Bitcoin at the grassroots level. Pakistan's among the top countries for crypto adoption with 20 million users. That's a lot of people. I actually think the real number of adoption in Pakistan's actually so much higher than that. When we really start to dive into the numbers here, you'll be able to see that adoption could be even bigger than what we estimated. If you look at some of the biggest countries across Asia, Europe, in regards to adoption, we can see Pakistan is in the top 10. Again, big, interesting. Have a look at how rapidly the adoption in Pakistan is growing. It is going absolutely exponential as we talk right now today in early 2025. But I think they're not the only giants who, of course, have, let's just call it what it is, welcomed Bitcoin with open arms this week. Because we can see it's been exposed earlier in the week that Russia and China have been exposed for settling trade in Bitcoin. Russia and China use Bitcoin to circumvent sanctions in oil trades. No, I'm not joking. I didn't slip up. That's actually happening. Vanek, a massive multi-trillion-dollar money manager, actually confirmed that for us earlier in the week. And I'm not going to rehash that entire news in depth today because I'm going to do that in a future video. Again, the 700 of you guys on this live stream are getting a little bit of a secret sauce, the inside scoop. But something that I think is really interesting is these countries who are adopting Bitcoin early in a big way today, have a look at the price of Bitcoin in their local currency. They're not power laws. So I wrote this tweet. This is way back in 2024. I wanted to bring it back to your attention today because I mentioned Pakistan in it. But we can see the power law has already broken for all of these countries around the world. Pakistan, home to 240 million people. Nigeria, home to 220 million people. Turkey, 85 million people per population. And Sudan and Ghana, both with 34 and 48 million person populations. This is something I just wanted to highlight that I think a lot of people think these traditional models are going to last forever, but they're not. Have a look at the chart on screen. That's the chart of Bitcoin in the Nigerian Naira. Again, 220 million people use this currency. Bitcoin is, well, not a power law. Okay, as simple as that. And I do think this is something to just keep an eye on. If we even, I would love to try to pull up. I can't find Bitcoin in Pakistani rupees. Maybe I can. But again, this is like, I really do think that watching what's happening in these emerging markets can be a little bit of a sign for things to come, so to say. And the fact that Bitcoin is not a power law in Pakistan or any of these other countries who are right now aggressively adopting Bitcoin, I think it's something to certainly keep an eye on. And I do think Donald Trump he's changed a lot by sending this Bitcoin warning across the world, telling the world America is going to be the #1 Bitcoin superpower of the entire world. Again, what is this going to do with price? How is this going to tie into the supply shock we've been talking about, where we've just seen the biggest outflow from exchanges since November 2022? This chart still stuns me. I can't believe how big that massive red bar was when Bitcoin dipped below 80K. I think nation states are aggressively buying the dip. I think nation states like Singapore, Pakistan, China, Russia, they are the explanation for why we're seeing so much Bitcoin leave the exchanges last week. Again, bigger than what we saw when Bitcoin dipped below 20K in 2022. This is the biggest outflow in 3 years. It's 2025 right now. Pinch yourself. The FTX blow up was 2 years ago. And since then, we've just seen coins fly out of the exchanges in a bull run, which is relatively unprecedented. So again, if this trend continues, we don't have a ton of time left before we can buy our Bitcoin. Again, maybe our chances to buy Bitcoin under $1 million are rapidly disappearing. I want to run some numbers on that calculation and that scenario in a moment. But again, this is why I always encourage you guys, check out our show sponsors while you still can self-custody your Bitcoin. Go and buy some Bitcoin at the Bitcoin Well and custody it with Stampseed, because I think time is really beginning to run out. Why do I say that? What are the numbers and the maths behind that really scare me? Why am I saying now is the time to buy your Bitcoin? Well, let's have a look at this. Last week, I crunched some numbers and I said, okay, 46,000 Bitcoin were bought last week just by public corporations. So again, you can kind of see some of them in this chart. We got Strategy, Blockchain Group, MetaPlanet, GameStop, and others. When you run the numbers, just the public corporations, including mining giants like Marathon, raising $2 billion to buy more Bitcoin. When you run the numbers, 46,000 Bitcoin were bought just by the public companies, and there was only 3,150 Bitcoin mined that week. Think about that for a minute. So we saw a deficit of 43,000 coins. If that continues, if what happened last week continues for the next 52 weeks, you got no Bitcoin on exchanges by March 2026. You get about 330 days left before the supply suffocation really hits us in a big way. That's why I'm kind of scared, because again, we're not even talking about nation states in the calculation I just ran. This is purely public corporations. So again, I think now is the time to be aggressively buying Bitcoin. And while we're talking about aggressively doing things, you need to really start thinking about your retirement today, much sooner than I think a lot of people are wanting to think about their retirement. Okay, buy Bitcoin while you can today, get it off the exchanges. Again, I actually recently did a deep dive where I showed that 0.00375 Bitcoin was enough to retire. Again, it's pretty bullish, but it's not as bullish as my most recent interview with George Bodine that I dropped yesterday, where he ran through the numbers for why Bitcoin could hit $240 million. If you're interested in either one of those two videos, once this live stream is finished, I'm going to put a link to both of them somewhere around there. And with all that said, guys, thank you so much for tuning in. I've got to run. My flight leaves Cusco in less than 2 hours, and I haven't even packed yet. So I'll see you guys in the next video.